Hello and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep. Welcome to episode 98 of International Relations This Week. Under this series, every Wednesday at 8 p.m., we have been covering important geopolitical developments of the last week which have a bearing on India's national interests. If you're benefiting from this initiative, do support us by liking the video, share your comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. So let's start with episode 98 of IR This Week by taking a look at the topics that we are going to discuss today. As always, we will first prioritize India's neighborhood, that is our immediate neighborhood, and we shall take a look at our neighboring country, Bangladesh. Because over the last few days, Bangladesh has been witnessing a political and economic crisis. This development in Bangladesh has a direct impact on India's interests, and hence we are going to cover this topic in complete detail. Then we are going to talk about two important regional organizations that are focused on South Asia and the region around it. We shall understand SAARC and BIMSTEC, carry out a comparison between the two, and we shall not only understand the important facts about these two important groupings with regard to prelims, but we shall also carry out a very important analysis where we compare BIMSTEC and SAARC from a mains point of view. After this, we shall take a look at some important global developments, including the impact of price cap that has been placed on Russian oil by Western countries. We shall also talk about the recent developments in China-Saudi Arabia relations, as it has a much wider impact on India and other countries as well. Finally, we shall talk about the Inflation Reduction Act of the United States, which has raised a lot of concerns in Europe. These are the 5 important topics that we have lined up for today, and we shall begin with Bangladesh. There is a crisis which is looming in Bangladesh. A political economic crisis has hit the country, and you might have read in newspapers that Bangladesh has been witnessing massive protests in the last few days. These protests which have hit Bangladesh, they have been led by the principal opposition party, the BNP, the Bangladesh Nationalist Party. These protests have posed a serious challenge to the ruling Awami League, which is headed by Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. The protesters, who are backed by the opposition party, they are campaigning against the Prime Minister, against her policies. The protesters have been calling the Prime Minister as a dictator. They're calling upon the Prime Minister to step down and resign and call for fresh elections in the country. This is a result of the anti-incumbency feeling which has prevailed in Bangladesh over the last few months. Because Sheikh Hasina has been the leader of the country for almost 13 years now. Since 2009, Sheikh Hasina and her party Awami League, they haven't lost an election. Sheikh Hasina has won 3 consecutive elections. She has a lot of achievements and success to her credit. But at the same time, Bangladesh has been witnessing a major economic crisis in the last couple of years. And as a result, anti-incumbency sentiments have increased. That is, sentiments against the ruling government have gone up. The opposition party is trying to capitalize on this, and this has led to massive demonstrations and protests which have even turned violent. The Bangladeshi Prime Minister has labeled these protesters as arsonist, terrorist elements, and she has used force to curb these protests. In these clashes, several protesters have been killed as well, including few political activists from the opposition BNP, and this has escalated political tensions in Bangladesh. Now you might wonder, why is this topic relevant for India? If this concerns the internal politics of Bangladesh, why is this topic relevant for our exams? This topic happens to be very, very important because what is currently happening in Bangladesh represents a fundamental split in the society of Bangladesh. See, Bangladesh is not new to violence, protests and turmoil. Since 1971, since the country gained independence, the country has gone through a lot of political volatility. And every time there have been protests in Bangladesh, every time there have been these violent events in Bangladesh, they have been a direct result of the fundamental split that has dominated Bangladesh society. And this is exactly what we need to understand. Because this divide in Bangladeshi society and in its politics has a direct impact on India's national interests. So in the next 15 to 20 minutes, I'll try to comprehensively cover this topic, specifically from a mains point of view. In this image, you can see Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, the leader of Awami League, which is the ruling party. You can also see Khalida Zia, the former Prime Minister of Bangladesh, the leader of BNP, Bangladesh Nationalist Party. The two top leaders of the country who symbolize the fundamental split in Bangladeshi society and the ideology that dominates Bangladeshi society. The Awami League has always been seen as a nationalist party which led the country towards independence in 1971. Whereas the BNP, the opposition BNP, has been aligned with radical Islamist forces. It is seen to be aligned with Pakistan, and it is seen to have promoted anti-India sentiments when it was in power. It is for this reason that these internal developments of Bangladesh have a direct impact on India. See, currently Khalida Zia is serving a jail term. She was arrested on corruption charges a few years back. She was convicted as well, and she has been sentenced. So right now the party is led by her son, Tariq Muhammad, who is also convicted in several cases and currently is hiding in London. So from London, he has been leading this party, the opposition party, and has been trying to revive the fortunes, the electoral fortunes of the BNP. The Awami League led by Sheikh Hasina is trying to counter the BNP and its rise, because Awami League sees the BNP as a threat to the very foundation of Bangladesh. To understand this, to understand more about this, you need to take a look at the background. You need to understand the brief history of Bangladesh as well. In these protests, the BNP has been calling upon the prime ministers to step down, and they have blamed the Awami League for the economic crisis that currently the country is staring at. In Bangladesh, debt burden has gone up. The government expenses have increased. Corruption reportedly is very high within the government. Along with that, Bangladesh has sought help from the IMF. Inflation has shot up. So the prices of essential items have gone up, which is hurting the common man. So in the midst of this economic crisis, the opposition led by BNP is trying to capitalize on the economic crisis, and it is pushing for a change. It is pushing for a regime change, and it is calling for elections to take place. See, Bangladesh is due for elections next year. The term of Awami League will end in 2023. So by the end of next year or by early 2024 is when the actual elections are supposed to take place. But during these violent protests led by BNP, the protesters are calling upon the government to step down and establish a caretaker neutral government so that immediate elections can be held. They are blaming the Awami League for manipulating the government and the institutions, and they have alleged that if elections are held under the Awami League, then the chances are high that those elections can be rigged and manipulated. Now, these are some very serious allegations that are coming up, and it shows that Bangladesh is headed towards more volatility and more turmoil in the coming months. So to more understand about how these developments affect India, we need to take a look at the history of Bangladesh and understand the brief background to India-Bangladesh relations. See, Bangladesh happens to be one of the most important neighbors for India because we share the longest land border with this country. Amongst all the land borders that we have, India-Bangladesh border runs to around 4,096 kilometers. So automatically, Bangladesh becomes critical for India, and more importantly, it is sandwiched between mainland India and the northeast of India. You can see that northeast of India is connected with rest of India through a narrow land corridor here called the Siliguri corridor, which is a choke point for India. It's also referred to as a chicken's neck of India, as it's a vulnerable choke point. So Bangladesh is effectively sandwiched between northeast of India and the rest of India. Thus, it becomes very vital for our strategic interests, security interests, and also for our economic interests. We share a lot of resources with Bangladesh. We not only share a long land boundary, we even share many rivers, many important river systems. They form transboundary rivers between the two countries. We have the Ganga river system that flows into Bangladesh as the Padma. We have the Brahmaputra that flows down from Assam, where it is known as the Jamuna in Bangladesh. Then we have the Teesta river flowing down from Sikkim and West Bengal, then into Bangladesh. We have the Barak river flowing from the northeast of India into Bangladesh. We have the Feni river flowing from Tripura into Bangladesh. These are just a few major rivers I'm mentioning here. In total, we share 54 transboundary rivers, and many of them are disputed. We have water sharing disputes. We share many important ecosystems like the Sundarban ecosystem over here, where the Gangetic system and the Meghna river system, which is a result of the confluence of all these rivers. So these deltaic plains are very sensitive ecosystems where both India and Bangladesh face many challenges. This area that I highlighted from West Bengal to Chittagong Cox's Bazar region, this whole stretch of the deltaic plain formed by the Ganga, the Meghna, it is very, very vulnerable to disasters. It is very vulnerable to rising sea levels, which is a result of climate change and global warming. So these are some common challenges that we face. Plus, along these borders, we have many security threats as well. Organized crime, cross-border terrorism and insurgency, trafficking, all sorts of security challenges are also present along this sensitive border. In fact, when insurgency was raging in the northeast of India, particularly between 1960s to 1990s, Bangladesh and then East Pakistan, that is before 1971, had become the hub and the safe haven for many of these terrorist and insurgent groups. So for stabilizing northeast India and to address all the security challenges along the border and also in northeast India, the help of Bangladesh is very critical for India. To tackle organized crime like drug smuggling, arms smuggling, human trafficking, cattle smuggling, etc., we need the assistance of Bangladesh. To prevent illegal migration from taking place, we again need the assistance of Bangladesh, because illegal migration has led to serious social challenges in northeast India, especially in Assam, even in Tripura, and it has even contributed to rise of insurgency in few northeastern states. Various northeast insurgent groups, the Naga outfits, the Bodo groups, Assam and Tripura based outfits, all these insurgent terrorist organizations, they've taken shelter in Bangladesh at one point of time. So to stabilize the northeast of India, to deal with these security threats along the border, and also to bring growth and development to northeast India, Bangladesh is absolutely critical for us. Bangladesh can help in establishing connectivity. It can provide better connectivity by linking our roads, railway lines, water networks, that is inland navigation networks, so that we can connect northeast India with Bay of Bengal and with the rest of India, thereby promoting economic activities as well. So for all these reasons, Bangladesh is very, very vital for us. But this country has gone through a lot of crisis, a lot of volatility in the past. Before 1971, I hope you know that Bangladesh was part of Pakistan. It was East Pakistan. When the Bengal province was partitioned, 1947, it was partitioned into West Bengal and East Pakistan. So in East Pakistan, the Bengalis, both Bengali Hindus and Muslims, they were oppressed, they were discriminated, they were targeted by the Pakistani elite, the Punjabi elite from West Pakistan. This discrimination, oppression continued for 2 decades. And by 1960s, there was a rebellion that started brewing in East Pakistan. Back then, this political outfit called the Awami League, led by Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, the founding father of Bangladesh, also the father of Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, he would provide leadership to the Awami League and the Bengali liberation movement after he was denied his right to become the leader of the country. In 1970, Sheikh Mujibur Rahman had won a historic election but the West Pakistani elite prevented Sheikh Mujibur Rahman from capturing power. They violated democratic electoral principles and they continued the oppression and targeting of the Bengalis in East Pakistan. So this laid the foundation for a Bengali liberation movement, for the Bangladesh liberation movement led by Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. So as Pakistan used force against the Bengali protesters, it almost committed a genocide in 1971. This triggered a massive refugee crisis. India was burdened with millions of refugees, and we had a commitment to protect the Bengali community, and also we had a strategic opportunity to weaken Pakistan. So back then, India would capitalize on this opportunity, and India would go on to play a direct role in liberating Bangladesh. We would provide political diplomatic support to Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, the Awami League, and other factions called the Shanti Bahini, which were leading the political struggle. Reportedly, India even extended covert support through its intelligence agency to arm and train the Mukti Bahini, which was an armed group, a rebel group, seeking liberation from Pakistan. Eventually, this led to the 1971 war in December 1971, where India directly carried out a military intervention to liberate Bangladesh. So since then, the Awami League and Sheikh Mujibur Rahman became very close to India. They were ever grateful to India. And since then, this faction has represented the nationalist faction in Bangladesh. The nationalist faction has been pro-India, has always supported the liberation movement, and has been opposed to the atrocities that was committed by Pakistan back then. But very soon, things would change in Bangladesh. India was hoping to build a strong, friendly relationship, but this was disrupted when Sheikh Mujibur Rahman was assassinated in mid-1970s. By 1974, India lost a close friend, and Awami League was thrown out of power by the Bangladeshi military. The radicals in the Bangladeshi army, who were still aligned with Pakistan, they would capture power and establish military rule, military dictatorship for almost 2 decades and promote anti-India sentiments in Bangladesh. Following this, in 1991, after the military rule came to an end, the BNP, the Bangladesh Nationalist Party that we were talking about, would rise to power and it would continue the hostile relationship with India. I'm going to give you more details regarding this period. From 1974 to almost 2006, for almost 3+ decades, we had a very hostile, complicated relationship with Bangladesh because of the military rule and because of the BNP, which had formed the government in Bangladesh. The only relief for India was in 96, from 96 to 2001, when Awami League came back to power under Sheikh Hasina. There was a slight improvement in the relationship during this period. But again, the BNP would come back to power from 2001 to 2006, and the hostile relations would continue, where Bangladesh would create multiple security challenges for India, especially in the northeast region. So for India, it was a very big breakthrough in 2009 when Sheikh Hasina emerged victorious in the 2009 elections and brought Awami League back to power. Since then, Awami League has not lost an election. Sheikh Hasina has won 3 consecutive elections and has built a solid relationship with India, a very friendly, cordial relationship where almost every issue that affects India has been addressed by the Sheikh Hasina government. Now, just to give you a better idea here, I want you to take a look at the hostile relations that Bangladesh had cultivated with India under the BNP rule and under the military dictatorship, which was seen as pro-Pakistan, seen to be aligned with radical elements, including the Jamaat-e-Islami and other radical Islamist forces. During this period, from 1974 to almost 2006, during this period, anti-India forces were harbored in Bangladesh, and Bangladesh had become a safe haven for multiple Northeast insurgent outfits. Various Northeast insurgent groups like NSCN, Bodo groups like NDFB, Assam-based outfits like Ulfa, even the Mizo National Front, all these outfits were sheltered in Bangladesh, previously under East Pakistan as well, as a part of Pakistan's covert war against India. There was direct external support coming in for insurgency and cross-border terrorism against India. Key projects proposed by India would be derailed by these governments. India was hoping to set up a gas pipeline from Bay of Bengal to link India, Bangladesh and Myanmar. These important projects would be derailed. These governments would align closely with Pakistan and promote destabilization of Northeast India by directly supporting various insurgent groups and terrorist outfits. They wouldn't tackle organized crime, which was widely prevalent along the India-Bangladesh border. All sorts of organized crime, human trafficking, cattle smuggling, illegal migration, drug trafficking, arms smuggling, all these criminal activities were rampant, and these criminal activities are eventually linked with insurgency and terrorism. So Bangladesh had created a fertile ground for this during the term of these hostile governments. Even the other disputes like water sharing disputes over Teesta, Farakka barrage and others were escalated by these governments. So we had a very complicated hostile relationship with Bangladesh when the BNP was in power, and we saw that the BNP was aligned with Pakistan, aligned with radical Islamist forces, thereby posing a grave threat to India. The big breakthrough for India was in 2009 when the Awami League came to power under Sheikh Hasina. Sheikh Hasina would transform the relationship single-handedly, establish very cordial ties with India, and immediately she would go on to address every core issue of India. All the security issues that India was facing were immediately dealt with. Bangladesh would cooperate with India in sharing intelligence, in carrying out joint counter-insurgency and counter-terror operations, and the safe haven that existed in Bangladesh was shut down by the Sheikh Hasina government. So Bangladesh played a critical role after 2009 in curbing Northeast insurgency and in bringing these groups, in ensuring that these groups would end their violent phase and enter negotiations with the Indian government. Many top leaders of these outfits were arrested and handed over to India. Today, if India struck a deal with the Bodo outfits, the Bodo Third Bodo Accord, if it could be signed, the credit goes to Bangladesh as well. If today we are negotiating a peace agreement with NSCN and other Naga groups, the credit again goes to the Bangladeshi government, which has assisted in bringing down these insurgent outfits. Along with this, economic relations have flourished, border issues have been sorted. Yes, we do have few issues like the Teesta water sharing issue and others. But despite this, India and Bangladesh have become very, very close partners. We are even negotiating a free trade agreement. And we have set up many joint connectivity projects to link India with Bangladesh, thus bring northeast of India closer to the rest of India. So all these achievements have been possible in the India-Bangladesh relationship thanks to a friendly government under Awami League and Sheikh Hasina. That is why the developments which are happening currently, they are of great relevance for India. India would be closely watching these developments because it represents a fundamental split in the society of Bangladesh itself. It's a split between the nationalist elements who are seen to be pro-India under the Awami League versus the more radical factions which are seen to be aligned with Pakistan and seen to be promoting anti-India activities by even supporting radical extremist organizations. Of late, several extremist groups like Islamic State and others have gained a ground in Bangladesh. So India sees this as a threat. So India would benefit as long as Awami League and Sheikh Hasina are in power. But currently, the Awami League government is facing a challenge because of the economic crisis and also because of the anti-incumbency that has crept in. People in general are frustrated due to the economic developments that have happened. See, if you go back by, let's say, 3-4 years, you would see that Bangladesh was being celebrated around the world as an economic success. Under Awami League, under Sheikh Hasina, Bangladesh had registered tremendous economic progress. In fact, Bangladesh is being designated as a developing country today by the United Nations. Very soon, Bangladesh will officially enter the list of developing countries, join India and others as a developing country, and it is being elevated from a least developed country. That is the kind of progress Bangladesh has seen under Sheikh Hasina and under the Awami League in the last 13 years. There has been rapid economic growth, job creation, has happened, millions of jobs have been created, poverty has been tackled, per capita income has increased. The Awami League government has taken up many socio-economic welfare measures regarding education, healthcare, and Bangladesh has really improved its human development indicators. In fact, in several areas, Bangladesh performs better than India with regard to few socio-economic parameters. It has seen a lot of success in the field of microfinance. It became a leader in the world of microfinance. It has helped farmers, women to become more self-sufficient, and it has dealt with many economic and social problems quite effectively. But in the last few years, challenges have crept in because on one side, the government has witnessed a rise in corruption at the lower levels. Apparently, several private companies, along with politicians, have promoted and bred corruption within Bangladesh, which has caused a lot of disaffection amongst the common people. This is at the center of the issue which is currently being debated in Bangladesh. Apart from corruption, Bangladesh is facing a serious economic threat. Its debt has increased, inflation has shot up, and there has been a general slowdown in its economic growth in the last few months. This has been aggravated by external factors as well, like the pandemic and the Russia-Ukraine conflict. These external factors also have played a role. So now Bangladesh is seeking IMF assistance, and it has joined the ranks of Sri Lanka and Pakistan, which are also receiving support from the IMF. Now, this is not good news for India because three of our neighboring countries are going through a major economic crisis and they are taking support from the IMF. We cannot afford this crisis to aggravate further in Bangladesh, as this could have very serious political and geopolitical consequences. The reason why I'm highlighting all these points is that UPSC can ask a question here. In fact, one such question had come in 2013. In the 2013 mains paper, UPSC had asked a question on the Shahbag Square protests which had taken place in Bangladesh that year. The Shahbag Square protests was a result of clashes between the nationalists and the radical Islamist forces, because Awami League government was trying to prosecute the war criminals of 1971. But supporters of BNP, the pro-Pakistan elements, the radical elements, they opposed the trials that were going on and they were trying to support the war criminals who were being prosecuted. This led to massive protests in Dhaka at the Shahbag Square, which represented a fundamental split in Bangladeshi society. So on this development, UPSC had already asked a mains question, asking about the relevance of this development, the Shahbag Square protests, how it represents this fundamental divide in Bangladeshi society between the nationalists and the radical elements, and what implications does it have for India. So that is why these developments are very, very crucial, and India is closely watching these developments. India would do better to cultivate relations with the BNP as well. You can't rely just on one party and one leader to have friendly ties with such an important neighboring country. So it is time for India to work on both the sides, or even support Awami League and Sheikh Hasina to overcome the economic and political crisis. So that is the reason why this topic is so important, and we have spent a good 25-28 minutes in discussing this topic in complete detail. Now, moving on to the second topic, we'll talk about two important regional groupings or regional organizations that are focused on South Asia and the region around it, that is SAARC and BIMSTEC. But first, we should understand why are we discussing this topic. We have taken up this topic because the 8th of December is commemorated as the SAARC Charter Day. It was on this day that the SAARC Charter was adopted. So SAARC was in news last week. It was covered in various newspapers. BIMSTEC was also in news because Sri Lanka's former foreign secretary was pointing out the advantages of BIMSTEC grouping and how it can bring development to all the littoral states of the Bay of Bengal region. So in this context, it becomes important to examine BIMSTEC and SAARC. We should carry out a comparison, look at some important facts about SAARC and BIMSTEC that are needed for your prelims exam. And also, we should include a small analysis that could be relevant for the mains exam. You should be able to compare BIMSTEC and SAARC and point out which organization provides the right platform for India to promote regional ties and regional cooperation. So first, let's talk about this grouping called the SAARC, or the South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation. This grouping was established in the year 1985 at Dhaka by South Asian countries such as India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Bhutan, Nepal, Sri Lanka and Maldives. These countries established the SAARC, and later Afghanistan was also added as a member, and thus SAARC became the prominent regional grouping for South Asia. This group is headquartered at Kathmandu. The SAARC Secretariat is located at Kathmandu in Nepal, and the primary focus of SAARC grouping, or its primary objective, is to promote regional integration. That is to bring the region closer by erasing the boundaries, by promoting free movement of goods and people, and promote economic cooperation and economic integration, to create a common market. It even had a dream to create a common currency, a common customs union of sorts. So with this ambition, the SAARC was established. But today, almost 30 years later, many experts point out that SAARC is largely a failure. It's a failed organization, as it has not been able to achieve anything substantial. It has failed to achieve regional integration. South Asia remains as divided as it was, or the divides have increased. The economic cooperation and integration also has not been achieved in South Asia. So SAARC is largely seen as a failure, and the primary blame for the failure of SAARC lies on Pakistan and also on India-Pakistan tensions. On one hand, Pakistan has derailed all the major initiatives India has taken up. Whatever India would propose, Pakistan would derail that, because it wouldn't desire to have India dominate the South Asia region. For example, India proposed a motor vehicles agreement, which would provide for free movement of vehicles, goods and even people to integrate these economies. But Pakistan would derail the initiative, which pushed India to start a parallel initiative called the BBIN, that includes Bangladesh, Bhutan, India and Nepal. Right? Since Pakistan derailed this motor vehicles agreement at SAARC, India was forced to focus on a sub-regional motor vehicles agreement called BBIN. So today BBIN is functional. Bhutan has stayed out of it for its own reasons, for environmental reasons. But India, Bangladesh, Nepal have signed the motor vehicles agreement, looking to promote the movement of vehicles and exchange of goods between the respective countries. India proposed a satellite, the SAARC satellite, but Pakistan tried to derail this as well. So India excluded Pakistan from this initiative, and India launched the South Asia satellite in 2017 that provides communication services and other benefits to all the other members of SAARC, excluding Pakistan. This is just one instance. So repeatedly, Pakistan has derailed Indian initiatives at SAARC. It has affected regional integration and economic integration. Upon this, Pakistan has been sponsoring terrorism, promoting radicalism, which has destabilized the whole region. Every terror attack originating from Pakistan has increased India-Pakistan tensions, thereby derailing the SAARC grouping itself. Also, the other SAARC members have their own internal problems, be it Sri Lanka, Maldives, Nepal, Bangladesh, Afghanistan. They've all seen political crisis, economic crisis, disasters. So the region itself has been unstable, and thereby the SAARC grouping in itself has failed. But 2016 in particular was a turning point for SAARC, because after the Uri attacks took place, which was carried out by the Jaish-e-Mohammed, sponsored by Pakistan, India decided to adopt the SAARC minus Pakistan strategy. After the Uri attacks, Pakistan was supposed to host the SAARC summit in 2016. This was the first SAARC summit taking place after 2014. But India boycotted the SAARC summit because of the Uri attacks, which was sponsored by Pakistan. And all the other SAARC members, they sympathized with India, they blamed Pakistan for the attack, and they also boycotted the SAARC summit. So since then, India has promoted the SAARC minus Pakistan approach, and parallelly, we have revived another old regional organization called BIMSTEC. BIMSTEC was in existence since 1997, but it was never a prominent grouping of the region. Now, since we started sidelining SAARC after Uri attacks after 2016, we parallelly revived an older organization called BIMSTEC to allow India to play the leadership role in the region. BIMSTEC gives us a unique opportunity to not just focus on South Asia, but also on the strategic Bay of Bengal and also the Southeast Asia region. This is where you need to understand what is BIMSTEC and why it is important for India. See, BIMSTEC was established back in 1997 through the Bangkok Declaration. Initially, it was called BISTEC. It was formed by Bangladesh, India, Sri Lanka, Thailand. So it was named after these four countries. It was focused on promoting economic cooperation between the South Asian and Southeast Asian countries. So since then, BIMSTEC was seen as a bridge that could connect South Asia with Southeast Asia. This was aligning with India's Look East policy as well, through which we were paying more attention to Southeast Asia region. Later, Myanmar joined the group and the grouping became BIMSTEC. Later, Nepal and Bhutan were also added as members, and thus the expansion of BIMSTEC also underwent a change, and today it stands for the Bay of Bengal Initiative for Multi-Sectoral, Technical and Economic Cooperation. This group focuses on several sectors. It is a sector-based organization. It has identified 7 key sectors, which are the focus areas like connectivity, trade, security, energy, tourism, cultural relations, disaster management. So 7 key focus areas have been identified, and BIMSTEC is working actively in promoting cooperation amongst these members in all these key areas. So India has prioritized BIMSTEC since 2016, especially after we sidelined SAARC and excluded Pakistan from the South Asia region. So if you look at this from India's perspective, India is not placing much hope on the SAARC grouping. There was a brief hope in 2020 when the COVID-19 pandemic started. India brought the SAARC countries together when the pandemic started and announced assistance as well to promote cooperation amongst the SAARC members. But other than that, SAARC has not seen any progress. In fact, since 2014, there has not been a SAARC summit at all. This clearly shows India's priority. India's priority right now is on BIMSTEC. In BIMSTEC, we are not just promoting diplomatic economic relations, we are promoting defense and security relations as well. A BIMSTEC military exercise has been conducted. Disaster management has been prioritized, and HADR assistance, humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, has also acquired prominence. A disaster management exercise also has been conducted by the BIMSTEC countries. Earlier this year, in April 2022, when the Colombo summit of BIMSTEC took place, there was a landmark development. During this Colombo summit, the BIMSTEC charter was adopted by the BIMSTEC countries, which provides for a defined structure and defined objectives for the organization. The countries have even adopted a master plan for transport connectivity to boost connectivity between South Asia and Southeast Asia. They have adopted a master plan for transport connectivity, which is financed by the Asian Development Bank. The focus of BIMSTEC is to leverage the Bay of Bengal region, promote relations and economic ties amongst these rim states or littoral states of Bay of Bengal. So India strongly believes that BIMSTEC is the future for us. We have clearly seen a sidelining and neglect of SAARC. This aligns with our Act East policy, our Indo-Pacific vision as well, because Bay of Bengal is a key part of the Indian Ocean. So this is the important analysis that you need to be aware of with regard to BIMSTEC and SAARC, plus the key facts which can be relevant for your prelims. With this, let's move on to the other 3 small topics. We'll talk about the price cap on Russian oil exports that was placed by the G7 countries along with Australia and European Union. The Western countries essentially led by the G7, which includes the developed industrialized nations like US, Canada, UK, Italy and others, then Australia and all the members of European Union, all 27 countries. So collectively, they have placed a price cap on Russian seaborne crude oil exports, and they have placed a cap of $60 per barrel. So you should understand why have they placed the price cap? What's the reason? How does it affect Russia and the global oil markets? And how does it affect India? These are the three important points we need to understand. The price cap has been placed by these countries primarily to punish Russia for invading Ukraine. As you know, Western countries have already placed crippling economic sanctions on Russian economy and on Russian exports. So these group of Western countries, which are informally referred to as the price cap coalition, they have together taken legal measures within their countries, and starting from 2023, price caps will apply on Russian oil exports which are carried by ships. It will specifically apply for seaborne oil exports of Russia. As you know, oil and gas is a major export for Russia, brings in a lot of revenue for Russia. So Western countries are planning to hit Russia financially for invading Ukraine and for destabilizing Europe. This is an extension of the sanctions that Western countries have brought up against Russia. So they have planned a price cap because they don't want to disrupt the global oil markets. Because the global economy is already very sensitive. It's in a very delicate stage. We might be staring at a long-term recession. So Western countries are aware of the global economic consequences and the situation that exists right now. So in order to not to disrupt the global oil markets and the global economy, instead of placing an entire ban on Russian oil exports, they are just placing a price cap so that they can cut Russian profits, cut Russia's revenue, which it is earning through oil exports. At the same time, it will allow Russia to continue part of its exports at a lower price, thereby ensuring enough oil supply to meet the demands of the global market without destabilizing the global economy. This is the strategy of the Western countries. They don't want to shock the economy. They don't want to create a major crisis in the oil market, because if there is a complete ban, it will lead to a shoot up of oil prices and it will have a major economic repercussion on almost every country. So that is why they are placing a price cap, and they are extending the sanctions to related services such as ship insurance, vessel clearances, etc. Because see, when Russia exports oil through the sea route, the ships which are carrying this oil, they all have to get insurance, they all have to obtain a lot of permits and licenses, and much of this is controlled by European countries. For example, ship insurance is mainly controlled by United Kingdom. Almost 95% of this insurance market is controlled by the UK. So they are planning to make it costly for Russian oil exports through the sea route to discourage the export of Russian oil. They have put this price cap at $60 so that it can hurt Russia's profit margins, thereby reduce Russia's revenue from oil exports. This is their primary objective here. Without these services like insurance, clearances, etc., it would become difficult for Russia to continue the exports and make profits on it. At the same time, it will ensure that enough Russian oil reaches the market, which will not disrupt the oil markets in the global economy. Now, Russia, of course, has criticized this move. It has said it is not going to affect its oil exports because there are other countries which are willing to buy Russian oil even at a greater cost. Russia has even considered the possibility of a floor price, a minimum price, to counter the price cap that the G7 countries have placed on Russian oil exports. So these increasing tensions and price wars between Western countries and Russia can have an impact on the global oil market, and it could affect countries like India, which have become major procurers of Russian oil. See, Russia has been supplying oil and gas to India, but it was always a minor supplier to India. But ever since the war broke out and Western sanctions were placed on Russia, Russia has offered its oil and gas at a discounted price, at a cheaper rate, and India has been the biggest beneficiary. India has gone all out to ignore the Western sanctions, and we have purchased the discounted oil from Russia, and at one point Russian oil accounted just for 0.2% of our total oil imports as of March 2022. But by October-November 2022, Russia had emerged as the top oil supplier to India, even overtaking Iraq and Saudi Arabia, which are usually the top oil suppliers to India. In the last few months, Russia has become the top oil supplier to India. So India has capitalized on this opportunity to bring down its import bill and to guarantee our energy security. Because India obviously is looking after its national interests. We buy what is best for India. We buy from any source possible to ensure that our energy security is guaranteed at the cheapest price possible. So for India, this is a win-win situation. For Russia as well, it's a win-win situation. Even China has continued to be a major procurer of Russian oil and gas. So Western countries are looking to hit these exports in particular. Much of the oil that we import from Russia passes through the sea route. So this could become costlier for India because the insurance costs might go up, or insurance services may not be given by the European companies. Other shipping services may not be extended by European countries. So this could affect the shipments to India and it could disrupt the oil markets. If it does have an effect, then it could lead to a shoot up of oil prices. Russia might cut production. Russia, which is influential at OPEC and OPEC plus grouping, it might push other countries to cut oil production in order to balance out the prices, thereby triggering more volatility in the oil market. So this obviously affects India, as India is a major importer of oil and gas. However, there is another possibility as well. If Russia bypasses the sanctions, Russia can use its own ships, or India, China, they can use their own ships to continue these oil shipments with their own insurance without depending on European companies and European countries. If they can do that, they can even bypass the impact of the price cap. That is what many experts are suggesting. So many argue that the price cap will not really have a big impact on Russia, but Russia might lose out on some profits, but the oil exports might continue and countries like India might stand to benefit. But there is a possibility that the cost might increase, the supplies might get disrupted as well. It's in this context that the topic becomes very, very important. India has not supported the price cap. We have reiterated that we are going to continue purchasing the discounted oil from Russia. And this is not just in the interest of India-Russia relations, but this is also in our own national interests. Because as stated by India's foreign minister, India is looking after its own national interests, which means we will go out and buy oil from any cheap, reliable source. It's important for us to bring down the import bill, and if there is cheaper oil available, India is going to go out and purchase this. So here India has called out the hypocrisy of the Western countries. Western countries are specifically targeting the seaborne Russian oil exports, whereas the price cap will not apply for oil and gas supplied through pipelines, land-based pipelines. They're excluding the pipeline-based oil exports and gas exports of Russia. Why? Because the pipeline-based oil gas exports of Russia is critical for European countries. Russian gas in particular, supplied through land-based pipelines, is absolutely crucial for European nations during the winter season. So they are not applying the price cap for the gas that is exported by Russia through pipelines. They're only targeting the sea-based shipments, which is targeted to hit Russia and other countries like India, China, which are procuring this oil from Russia. So that is why India has boycotted and rejected these Western sanctions and the price cap, and we have stated that we will continue importing Russian oil and will try to bypass the hurdles being created by the price cap. This is what we need to understand from the point of view of our exams. Next, China-Saudi relations was in news. There has been a big development here, so we should just be aware of this important development. We need not go in depth here, but just awareness regarding this development is crucial, as the growing closeness between China and Saudi Arabia has an impact on India and also on the United States. Last week, Chinese President Xi Jinping paid a visit to Saudi Arabia. He met MBS, or Mohammed bin Salman, the leader of the Saudi kingdom, the monarch of the Saudi kingdom. During this visit, many important agreements have been signed. Vital agreements in key areas have been signed by China and Saudi Arabia. This symbolizes the growing economic strategic ties between the two sides, and it represents the strong economic relations that the two countries have built. Today, Saudi Arabia is the world's top oil exporter. Usually, Saudi Arabia is the second biggest exporter of oil to India as well. Traditionally, US and Saudi Arabia have been very close allies, not just with regard to oil trade and economic relations, even with regard to strategic and diplomatic relations. Traditionally, US and Saudi Arabia have been very close. But in the last few years, US-Saudi relations have been affected because US has targeted Saudi Arabia on the question of human rights, especially after Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi was assassinated reportedly by the intelligence agencies of Saudi Arabia in Turkey. This was an incident which happened a few years back, where assassination took place in Turkey. At the Saudi consulate in Turkey, a Saudi dissident, a rebel journalist who was sheltered in US, he was apparently assassinated inside the Saudi consulate, and the US blamed the Saudi government and Saudi agents and intelligence agencies for this assassination. Since then, US-Saudi relations have been hit, and on other issues as well, with regard to dealing with Russia, on the Taliban issue in Afghanistan, and other important issues of West Asia, there is a divide which has emerged between US and Saudi Arabia. Parallelly, Saudi Arabia has gotten closer to China, which today is the world's biggest energy consumer. Saudi Arabia is the top exporter and China is the top consumer. So naturally, it has brought these two countries together, and they have already built a very, very strong economic relationship. Their bilateral trade volume is almost $87 billion. This year, it will definitely cross $100 billion. And Chinese exports to Saudi Arabia have reached 30 billion, whereas China is importing around 57 billion worth commodities and products, and majority of it is Saudi oil. Saudi oil supplies are critical for the Chinese economy. So this is not just any ordinary economic relationship and trade relationship. It's a vital strategic relationship that these two countries are building. So to cement this relationship and to take it forward, Chinese leader Xi Jinping visited Saudi Arabia and they've signed important agreements. These agreements, around 34 investment agreements have been signed. They cover critical sectors like connectivity projects, even high technology domain, including emerging critical technologies like cloud computing, 5G networks, artificial intelligence, green energy, renewable energy, even in the field of health, education. So across several vital domains, China and Saudi Arabia have signed important investment agreements, and they have further built upon their close military and strategic ties. China is already supplying arms and weapons to Saudi Arabia. They have plans to collaborate in the development of certain weapons, including drones. The two sides have aligned together on key projects like Belt and Road Initiative or the One Belt, One Road project of China. There are few Saudi companies which are government-owned entities or funded by the Saudi Kingdom, which are involved in China's Belt and Road Initiative projects. They are involved in financing the projects or in executing the projects. So all these agreements that they are signing will only bring these two countries closer and will help China to include Saudi Arabia firmly under its Belt and Road Initiative. This will bring them economically closer and strategically closer. The two countries have also committed to respect and protect each other's core interests. For China, the core interests are issues like Taiwan, Tibet, Hong Kong, the One China policy. On these core issues of China, Saudi Arabia will not question China. It will not join the Western countries. China is accused of human rights violations in Xinjiang, in Tibet, in Hong Kong, in Taiwan. Right? On all these issues, Saudi Arabia will remain neutral, or it will remain pro-China, thus distancing Saudi Arabia from the US. Parallelly, China will also not interfere with Saudi's internal issues. The allegations of human rights violations against Saudi Arabia, China is going to ignore that. It will not support the Western countries at the UN and the Human Rights Council. So this clearly marks an emerging divide between US and Saudi Arabia and how China and Saudi Arabia are getting closer. This is a strategic shift that you are witnessing, and this will have implications on India because India also shares very, very important relations with Saudi Arabia. Even for India, Saudi Arabia is a top oil supplier. We have a strategic partnership with Saudi Arabia. We collaborate in the field of counter-terrorism, sharing intelligence. We attract a lot of investments from Saudi Arabia. So in that context, India-Saudi relations might also see some changes going forward as China-Saudi relations get closer and stronger. So both India-US will closely watch these developments. That is why one should be aware of this important development. Now coming to the last topic, we shall talk about the IRA, Inflation Reduction Act, which was enacted by the United States in August. In the month of August, this law called IRA, Inflation Reduction Act, was enacted by the United States. This topic was again in news last week because several European countries, European leaders, especially French President Emmanuel Macron, he has opposed the Inflation Reduction Act, and European countries have expressed serious concerns about this American law. So it's in this context we need to briefly understand what is this law, what does it deal with, why are European countries concerned about it. This development does have an impact on India. It does have implications for Indian interests. So let's see what is the IRA, what is Inflation Reduction Act. As the name itself suggests, this act is designed to rebalance the fiscal policy of the US government, to realign its revenue and expenditure so that the US can promote its domestic industry, deal with climate change and emissions, and also promote socio-economic welfare. The idea is to tackle inflation, promote domestic growth, make US more self-sufficient, and reduce American dependency on other countries like China and others. This plan or this act is also focused on promoting green technologies, promoting the green renewable industry within the US and help US reduce its reliance and dependency on others. It is focused on providing more options for the US government to increase its expenditure to help the weaker sections, the poor people, by increasing healthcare services, by tackling climate change, etc. So it's a very wide sweeping plan through which the US is promising tax breaks for the poor sections, subsidies, leverages, levies, incentives for various industries and companies which are going to produce certain products and commodities in the US, and increase in tax on certain large companies so that it will increase the revenue of the US government, which in turn will allow the US government to increase its expenditure in certain critical areas. Like for example, reducing the healthcare cost in tackling climate change and emissions. So this is essentially a rebalancing of the American fiscal and monetary policy through this act called the Inflation Reduction Act. The plan essentially is to provide for new taxes, impose a minimum corporate tax so that the US government will get more revenue, increase US revenue, and parallelly make more expenditures. So this is essentially the focus and the objective of the Inflation Reduction Act. Enforce the existing tax rules, increase tax collection, bring new taxes, and ideally scale up the revenue for the government. Use this increase in revenue and divert this revenue towards key sectors like climate change, reduction of emissions, promote the adoption of green technologies, especially electric vehicles, provide for affordable healthcare, make healthcare cheaper and affordable, promote resilience against disasters like drought conditions, forest fires. So the idea is to help the weaker sections by providing them better benefits. This calls for increased expenditure, and to match that, the government is looking to increase revenue through new taxes on big corporates and incentives for certain companies and industries to promote domestic production. So this is the broad plan of this act. It focuses on climate action. In fact, it's one of the biggest climate action efforts of the US. Around $370 billion is allocated for climate funding. This will provide massive incentives to electric vehicle companies, automobile manufacturers, companies that produce lithium-ion batteries and other such critical technologies. Right now, it is countries like China and European countries which are dominant in this particular segment. When it comes to electronic or electrical vehicles and batteries and renewable technologies, China and European countries are the market leaders. US is actually dependent on them. So US wants to cut its dependency on China and also on the European markets and supply chains, and it wants to build reliance, self-reliance and self-sufficiency over here. So it is aiming to cut emissions through these investments and create incentives for automobile manufacturers, battery producers and other critical industries so that they will focus on domestic production within the US. It will create more jobs, and the increase in taxes, the increase in revenue will be used to fund healthcare expenses, to bring down the cost of healthcare, to provide Medicare subsidies, to bring down the cost of drugs, essential vaccines, to bring down the insurance premiums, which are very, very expensive in the US. So this ambitious plan of the United States is opposed by European countries because they have a very big concern, and I hope you can understand why. The US is giving massive incentives and subsidies to certain industries which might be seen as violative of WTO rules. WTO rules calls for a fair trading mechanism. So European countries are alleging that these massive subsidies that US is promising, it is against fair market rules. It's against the rules of WTO. The fear is that big automobile manufacturers who are investing in producing electric vehicles, major battery producers, and other related industries which are being incentivized, they will all shift their production and their base from Europe towards the US because they can save millions of dollars in taxes. They will get a lot of incentives, perks, they will get tax holidays as well. This will help US to roll out electric vehicles, reduce emissions and meet its climate action targets, plus the increase in revenue, increase in jobs will help US to provide for socio-economic welfare such as reduced cost of healthcare, to make healthcare more affordable, to reduce emissions, to make the country disaster resilient. So the concern for European countries is that it will push the companies and the industries away from European countries towards the American market. This could cause a major long-term shift in the global economy and in global supply chains. So naturally, India would also be interested to watch these developments. India is also making big investments in the field of green renewable energy, electric vehicles and batteries. If there is a major shift happening from Europe to the US because of the Inflation Reduction Act, it will have consequences for India as well. It will have consequences for the green renewable energy market. It will have consequences for our climate action efforts as well. So it's in this context that the Inflation Reduction Act becomes important because European countries are very seriously concerned about this particular law. So with this, I would like to bring my discussion to an end. We have covered 5 important topics in enough detail, which is relevant for our UPSC exams. If you found the session to be fruitful, do let us know by liking the video, share your comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. So that is it from my side. Thanks for watching. Good night.